Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to History of English Literature lecture number 2. Today we'll talk about different things regarding literature, and then the history of English literature plus the impact of the society on literature. So first of all, I would like to discuss the outline of the lecture with you people today. We will take a start with the literature in general. So I think in order to understand history or something which is usually people think that is complicated. So the thing which is basic, that is we should understand the concept of literature in general, that how do we take literature in our society. Second thing which is again very much important, that is the types of literature. We have two types of literature. One is applied and the other one is pure literature. So we will talk about applied and pure literature in detail as well. Third thing today would be literature communicates experience. So this is not something which is in the air. This is based on the embodied experience of human beings. That is why we say that literature is a lively thing that is full of life. Fourth thing which we will discuss today, that is imagination and literature. So what is the role of imagination in literature, plus how imagination affects literature in the society. Then relation of literature to life. So these two concepts, relation of literature to life and literature communicates experience, both the concepts, they are interlinked with each other. So we'll talk about these concepts in detail. Then another thing is literature and society, how society impacts literature. Like we will study different periods in the history of literature, and we'll discuss in detail like how those periods they have affected English literature with the passage of time and the changes which have been taken place in different centuries. Another thing that is the topic number 7 for today's discussion, that is literature and writer's personality. So for most of the people, and I think this is a very good thing, that literature is basically a reflection, a clear-cut reflection of writer's personality. Whatever we perceive, whatever we think or feel, we make it part of our writing. So that is very important thing. Then gradually, like after keeping in view literature in general, literature communicates experience, relation of literature to life and literature in society, and then the last thing would be literature and writer's personality. Then we'll go for English literature, and I'll give you a very brief introduction of English literature. And then the last topic for the discussion today would be a brief critical survey of English literature, and in that survey we'll talk about background and development of English literature from the earliest times up to the present age. So you, my dear students, here you can see that there is a transition from literature in general, and then we'll go to the history of English literature, and then the importance of the different phases in the history of English literature. So my dear students, I hope you'll enjoy this lecture, and I will try to make this lecture interesting for you. First of all, literature in general terms. We are here not talking about English literature or any other kind of literature. That is, what is basically literature? Literature is one of the fine arts like music, dance, painting and sculpture, as it is meant to give aesthetic pleasure. So literature is one of the fine arts like music, in order to compose any kind of particular music, that is fine arts. Dance movements, okay, and then painting, you have to draw something, you have to paint something in order to give aesthetic pleasure to the audience. And then another thing is sculpture, like how to make statues, fine. So like these things, like music, dance, sculpture and painting, literature is also fine arts. So here we are putting literature into the domain of fine arts. Like fine arts is an umbrella term, and literature is one part of that fine arts. Literature consists of great books which, whatever their subject, are notable for literary form or expression. So literature is basically about books which are composed in a proper order, and these books can be on any subject matter. Another thing which is of greater importance in studying literature is that it is the aesthetic worth alone, or aesthetic worth combined with general intellectual excellence. So literature is basically, as we have discussed before as well, like literature is meant to give aesthetic pleasure, that is the aesthetic pleasure or the visible pleasure to the reader. So here that pleasure is combined, that can be alone, but usually that is combined with the intellectual excellence, like the art of writing something. So these things are very important in order to make literature giving aesthetic pleasure. In the realm of poetry, drama and fiction, so here students, you can see that we have three things. One thing is poetry. These are the different genres in the study of literature as well. One thing is poetry, the other one is drama, and then fiction. The greatest books are selected on the basis of aesthetic excellence or the beauty of expression. So all the greatest books in the genres of drama, poetry or fiction, all the greatest books, they are selected on the basis of the aesthetic pleasure which they give to the reader. So the basic thing or the most important thing in using literature, or in order to categorize any book that is a part of literature or not, and usually this aesthetic pleasure is combined with the intellectual excellence as well. Books dealing with subjects as history, biography, natural science, religion, politics are considered as literature because they are based on the experiences of people in society, they reflect writers' personality and many other things. So that was all about literature in general. Now we are moving another concept, that is the types of literature. As I told you before, that there are two types of literature. One is pure literature and the other one is applied literature. These two terms can be properly explained by studying Darwin's The Origin of Species and Keats' Odes on Aggression on. The Origin of Species has certainly some literary merit in the form of expressive power, as Darwin has communicated certain information to the reader in an appropriate style. So now we are going to focus on Darwin's book, that is The Origin of Species, and Keats' Ode on Aggression on. But in this case, here we're talking about Darwin's The Origin of Species. In this book, the expression is not so important as the information. So in this book, our focus is on information and not on the expression. So this is known as pure literature. Darwin expressed himself for the purpose of putting his reader in possession of a certain body of information. So the basic purpose of writing this book was that to deliver the information, and the focus was not on the expression. That is why it is pure literature, and thus persuading them for the clarity of a certain line of argument. So he gives an argument and then he clarifies the argument without concentrating on the expression of something. Basically, it was to deliver the argument, it was to deliver your information in an effective way and not in any other way. Even if the expressions were clumsy, the information nevertheless might be true and the argument reasonable. So it does not matter what kind of information was that, all the arguments, they were reasonable, and the information that was basically true because it was based on any kind of experience. The literary quality of a book has a certain specific purpose. There are basically two elements in the book: the merit of Darwin's purpose, what he wanted to deliver to the reader in the book, and the other thing was the merit of expressive power. Both things were present there. These two elements cannot be distinguished in Keats' Ode on Aggression on. So now we'll do a comparative study of the Origin of Species and Ode on Aggression on, that is written by John Keats. Ode on Aggression on gives us no information which may be true, or no argument which may or may not be cogent. In this case, the expression satisfies us simply by existing an expression and not as a means to an end. Here art does not take us beyond the domain of art. That is why this is called pure literature. So in this, basically we do not know either the information or any argument that is clear or not, that can be or that cannot be. Applied literature, another term, that is another type of literature as well. So we have to, in this kind of literature, we have to ignore the purpose of the writer in order to appreciate its literary value. So here basically we are ignoring the purpose of the writer, what type of personality he has, or the other factors which are involved in writing the literary kind of work. We have to appreciate his efforts and we have to encourage its literary value as well. The experience of the author has to be excluded or transformed into something pleasant in order to enjoy it. So basically, students, we use pure literature in order to know about something. We want to get the information and we use pure literature. When we try to enjoy something, like the prior reading, we read novels, we read different poems, so that is applied literature. So in applied literature, we usually ignore the writer. We do not take care of the writer's experience. We just put writer on one side and we enjoy the literature, or we transform into something. The experiences of the writer would be transformed into something pleasant. So here we use, again, the point is that we use pure literature in order to gain information, maximum information about something that is based on the reasonable argument. But applied literature is different from that one, because here we use it, we apply that literature in our daily lives. We transform the writer's experience. Basically, that depends upon the art of writing anything as well. Another point of the lecture today, that is literature communicates experience. So my dear students, what do you think? Literature can communicate or it cannot? If it can, then how? And if cannot, then why? Obviously, literature communicates experience because literature is life. This is about life. This is about human beings. This is about society. This is about different periods. So obviously literature communicates experience. So today I'll tell you how literature does it. The experience which lived in the author's mind must live again in the reader's mind. So this is communication. As you know, that communication is a two-way process. One is the sender and the other one is the receiver. So the reader, while reading any kind of book, he is basically the receiver, and the message the writer wants to deliver to the receiver, that is also very much important, and the writer is basically the sender of the message. So the author basically tries to deliver or to tell about his experience to the reader, so that experience must live again in the reader's mind as well. Fine. The writer has not merely to give the reader what he has experienced or how the experience has been taken. So here, what and how things are not important, like how he has experienced certain thing, how he has faced any mental trauma in past, and what he has experienced. These two things are basically not important, but what is important is that he must give to the reader his own experience. So this is like just giving the experience to the reader by putting him in a certain situation. In that particular situation, the reader feels the essence of the literature by himself. So this is the thing which is very much important. That's the pure essence of literature as well. The experience, whole and entire, must be communicated to the reader. So the experience is transplanted in the reader's mind, and then the experience would be communicated to the reader as well. For example, the writer is trying to say something to the reader. So what he does by putting certain kind of examples, like putting his or her imagination in form of words, so he is giving a kind of experience to the reader that is very much important. This is not easy to attain because the writer's experience is his own. So there must be a confusion in your mind as well, my dear students, that the experience is that of the writer and not of the reader. So that is why writing any kind of book, composing any poetry book, writing any kind of novel, that is not an easy task. So here the confusion lies in the question that how a writer can deliver his or her experience to the reader, because that is his own experience. So usually we think that it is not possible, but this is possible. I'll tell you how. It is the very process of his own life, no doubt. It is in the possession of the writer, and by no possibility it can be shared by another person, but the writer can do so by the power of imagination. Here we are moving towards another point, that is the power of imagination. Like you imagine something, you put your imagination in your work, and then you hand over that work to the reader, and the reader feels your experience. That is why it is literature is art. His experience may be actual or a sort of daydreaming, but imagination can transform it into something as a whole to the reader. So it depends what kind of experience the writer had. That can be actual, that can be a daydreaming, or that is, in other words, we can say that is based on the pure imagination only. But the task of the writer is that to transform that experience into the reader's mind, that he feels the essence, he feels the happiness, he feels the sadness in that while writing that kind of work which he has composed. Now, previously we were talking about imagination and literature, that how a writer puts his imagination in the book, and then he tries to transform that imagination to the reader in form of experience. That is the embodied experience of the writer as well. But the problem lies how to give that experience to the reader. How to give your imagination to the reader, that is very important task. Now we are moving towards a very interesting thing, that is imagination and literature. Usually people think that literature is pure imagination. You live in fantasy, you dream about something, and you write down the things. So we can say that imagination is very much important in literature. The writer must arouse the same imagination in his reader and can control it in such a way that the reader may also imitate the experience. That the reader, what is imitation? That is copy. My dear students, please note down two things from these two lines. One is imagination and the other one is imitation, or imitate the experience. First of all, the writer must develop some kind of imagination in his reader and control it in such a manner that the reader may also imitate that experience. So the composition or controlling the imagination is very much important, my dear students. Why? Because if that control is not there, if you do not know how to control the psyche of the reader or how to put your experience in a proper way in a particular kind of work, definitely your readers cannot imitate you. Your readers cannot imitate the experience which you have experienced basically, or it's part of your imagination, your fantasy, or you dream about something. So that is very much important. This can be achieved by means of words which should act as a symbol of his experience. So again, this is very much important, that how can you achieve it, like how can you deliver your experience to the reader, how can you make your reader imitate certain kind of experience. That is basically the writer's experience himself. So my dear students, you must be thinking that the experience is that of the writer and not of the reader. So this is not an easy task to give your experience to the reader. Okay, this can be achieved by means of words which should act as symbol of his experience. So the words are the symbols which would put your experience into something which is very authentic, very impressive, and very interesting as well. Medium of language as his disposal is limited, where there is no limit to the possibility of the imaginative experience. So when you put something when you put your imagination in form of words in a book, so that is very limited, but there are no limits of the imagination. So how this is possible to put your imagination into the words in order to deliver it to the reader? So this is not at all an easy task. Writer's language must not only express his experience but also represent the same experience to the reader. So this is not just an expression of the experience of the writer only, that should also represent the same experience to the reader. So you have to provide a kind of situation to the reader where he or she can feel the true essence of your writing. The main purpose of reading something. So this cannot be done in form of language alone, because language is very much limited as compared to imagination. So a writer, a good writer, must not only express his experience but also represent the same experience to the reader. So representation of experience is also very much important. The kind of scenario he provides to the reader, that's also very much important, and that is not only the expression of his individual experience. So that is why literature has a universal element as well. Both the things go simultaneously. One thing is the expression of the experience, and the other thing is the representation of experience, which is very much important. If you want your reader to feel the true essence of your writing, then you have to represent your experience in a quite good way. Literature is all about life. Literature is not something which is only saved in the books. So this is based on life. So life and literature, they have a very strong relationship, my dear students. So these are the things which make literature very interesting, because this is about real life. This is about society. This is about human beings and their experiences. There is an intimate connection between literature and life. Life is the subject matter of literature. So in literature, we talk about life. We do not talk about about fantasy only. No doubt imagination is still there, but that is again about life, full of life. Life provides the raw material on which literature imposes an artistic form. So life is just a raw material, so you have to pick out, or you have to make it refined and to give it a proper shape in form of literature. So this is very much important thing, like life is just a raw material, and you have to identify the important aspects. You have to write down your experiences, and you have to make it a proper product, a very valuable product in form of writing. Literature is the communication of the writer's experience of life. So basically literature is about life. This is based on the experiences of the writer. So this is the communication of the writer. Again, I'm telling you, let me repeat, my dear students, that communication is a two-way process. If we say that literature communicates experience, so that is a face-to-face communication with the experience. So there is somebody who is listening to you, and you are involved in the discussion with that person. So that is very much important. So in this way we take communication. Literature is the communication of the writer's experience of life. So it tells you the writer's experience about his or her personality, about the kind of tragedies which he has faced in his life, or the happiness or the things which he has in his life. So that is the true reflection of a writer's life and his experience of life. That experience, it depends. That experience can be positive, can be negative as well, like the bitter experience to the realities of life. So that would be a clear-cut reflection of that very bad experience in form of writing that is in front of you. So we cannot ignore a writer's personality here while reading literature. Connection between life and literature is not simple as it seems. So usually we think that literature is a reflection of life, but that connection, that is not as simple as it seems. This problem has been discussed by some of the greatest literary artists of the world, and their connection have been sometimes contradictory. Some of them are of the opinion that literature is not life. It doesn't have any kind of relation to life, and some are against them. They say the life and literature, they have a strong connection, a strong relationship. So we'll talk about those critics in detail as well. What are their views about literature and life? First critic is Plato. He used to, like, at that time there was no literature, so literature was termed in those times as poetry. So whenever I'll refer to poetry, whenever I talk about Plato's or Aristotle's views, so whenever that is poetry, basically that is not poetry. It is, that can be drama, that can be poetry. So this is not just limited to poetry. Actually the language, the old English was in form of poetry. That is why they always say, they do not say literature, that is poetry. According to Plato, poetry as a mere imitation of life. He looks at poetry as a mere imitation of life. So what is imitation? That is copy of life. So that is poetry is a copy of life. True reality consists in the ideas of things of which individual objects are but reflection or imitation. He developed the argument first with reference to the painter. So he gave the example of the painter, and then he would relate that example with that of the writer as well. Let me explain the example of the painter here. And previously we were talking about poetry as a mere imitation of life. Here this is an example of a painter. According to him, painting is an imitation of a specific object or group of objects. So again, there is a comparison between poetry and painting. For him, both are the same things. Poetry is a mere imitation of life. Painting is also an imitation of specific objects or group of objects. Painter only imitates what he sees and does not know how to make or to use what he sees. So this is like painters, they only imitate what they see, and they actually do not know how to make or how to use what they see. So this is only the imitation of what they see. They paint whatever they see. For example, if they want to paint a mountain or a flower, so basically they do not know how to make a real flower. Obviously they cannot make the mountains, so they just can paint it. That is why this is just an imitation, a copy of the mountains, a copy of the flowers and other things. For example, a painter can paint a bed but cannot make it. So painting is just an imitation. He or she just can paint the bed but do not know how to make a real bed. On the other hand, if we do a comparison of painting with poetry, he says that poet imitates reality without necessarily understanding it. So for him, poet imitates reality if they do or if they do not understand it. So there is no understanding, they just imitate the reality. Poetry or literature as a whole is an imitation of imitation and thus twice removed from truth. So basically he is trying to say that literature or poetry, they are not based on truth. That is only about the imitation of the imagination only, and that is twice removed from truth. So truth lies somewhere else in literature and poetry. Everything is based on lies according to Plato. So that was basically his view of looking at the literature, and then I gave you an example of the painter as well, and then the comparison of painter and of poet. His idea was further modified by his student Aristotle. In his book Poetics, he undertook to examine the nature and qualities of imaginative literature with the view of demonstrate that it is true and not false to what Plato had shown it. So according to Plato, everything is fake, everything is based on imagination, nothing is real, that is purely imitation of something. But Aristotle is of another view. He sees the nature and the qualities of the imaginative literature and a view to demonstrate that it is true and not false. So he thinks that whatever you write, whatever literary kind of works you are doing, that is not false, that is based upon the true realities of life, that is based upon the true experiences of life. That is a modification in Plato's views. He agreed with Plato on one point as well, that is the poetry is an imitation of reality. So for them, poetry, again students, I am telling you that poetry and literature, for them both are the same things. So poetry is an imitation of reality, that is a copy of the reality, another photograph of the reality. So this is not something which is just in the imagination, but something which is happening in the society, which is there, which you are experiencing. That is an imitation of the reality, and you give it a proper form in form of poetry. The imitation is the imaginative reconstruction. So here you can see imitation of reality. So my dear students, here you can see that this is literature is an imitation, and that is in form of the objective representation of life in literature. That is not only based on the subjectivity of any writer, that is the objective. So here another concept regarding literature is coming, that is, the literature has a universal element, it has an objective element. So poetry is not connected with the outside world in the simple and direct fashion supposed by Plato. So here basically he is rejecting the point that was given by Plato, that poetry is not connected with the outside world. So this outside world is the imaginative world of the author, of the poet. So that has nothing to do with the outer world. That is basically within the society, whatever you imitate and then you put it in form of poetry or any other kind of writing. The poet first derives an inspiration from the world by the power of his imagination. For example, my dear students, the poet imagined something. You know, the writers and the poets, they have a very good power of imagination. So they get an inspiration from the world by the power of their imagination. So they need to have that power of imagination in order to get an inspiration from the world. The art of poetry then imitates this imaginative inspiration in language. So this is the art of poetry, how you put your ideas, how you deliver your ideas in form of poetry. So that is about the imaginative inspiration in language. You need to have that kind of imagination in language as well, through which you can deliver your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings, and particularly your imagination to the readers in a quite good way. So this is very much important thing. So here we are talking about the imitation of reality plus imaginative reconstruction. So this is reconstruction of something, like you are doing it again, and that is an imitation as well, and then you need to have that kind of imaginative inspirational language as well, in order to impress the reader, in order to catch their attentions and to involve them in your discussion and to deliver your experience to the reader. That is very much important thing. Literature shapes certain kind of imaginative impulse, so it is in the hands of the literature to shape certain kinds of imaginative impulse as well. So through language, through different poetic devices, through other literary devices, you can formulate the imagination of the reader as well, and this would give rise to their imagination, and they can imagine about the things which are here in the society and which are not there, but those are part of the writer's imagination. It is not just possible to imagine life exactly as it is. So this is not possible. If you have something, you have, so you cannot imagine it. Definitely there is no use of imagination if you possess certain thing. The exciting thing is to imagine life as it might be, as you wish to be. So this imagination is about your wishes, about way of achieving the things which you want to have in your life. You can imagine about those things. Imagination becomes an impulse capable of inspiring poetry. Art of literature is not a slavish imitation of reality twice removed from truth. Actually, he is against Plato's views that imitation of reality is not twice removed from the truth, that it is not far away from the truth. The truth is hidden somewhere, and imitation of reality is something else. That is purely your imagination. Basically, that imagination is also based on truth, like the life which you want to have in future, that can be your imagination. So we cannot say. In order to conclude Plato's view, I would like to say that for him, imagination is also based on reality. It's not something which is just a part of your dreams or of the fantasy world. That has a reality, that has a truth behind it. According to Plato's, what is a poet's business? His business is not to write about the events that have happened, but what may happen, of the things which are possible in the light of probability or necessity. Poetry is a more philosophical, a more serious thing than history. So here we have two more points. One is that poetry, again, that is literature according to Plato and Aristotle. Like, poetry is more philosophical, a more serious thing than history. Usually this is an assumption that history is the biography of the society and literature is the autobiography of any society. So in that way, literature is more philosophical. It is a more serious thing than history. So usually we think that history is just a chronological sequence of different books which are written about any particular kind of topic. So literature is not like that. This is a pure imitation of the reality, that is a pure representation of the society in form of writing. That's not the chronological sequence of different events which are saved in the books. So it's not like that. Okay, the last point which was there, that the poet's business is not to write about the events that have happened. So poet has nothing to do with the past. Definitely that would be reflected in his writing. Past is also part of his life, but the purpose of putting his imagination into word is that the life which he wants to see, or the things which may happen in this society, and there is those things would be described in the light of probability and necessity. So by keeping in view the necessities of the ordinary human beings in society, you have to put your ideas, write down your ideas in form of poetry or in form of drama. That can be there, fine. History deals with the particular only, while poetry deals with the universal. So for example, if we talk about history of English literature, so that is purely about English literature only. But when we talk about literature or poetry, that is universal. So this is one of the most significant characteristics of literature as well, that it has a universal element. History is quite particular, that is restricted to any particular society, any particular genre, any particular literature, for example. But on the other hand, literature has a universal element, because this is about life, this is about human emotions, feelings and thoughts. So it can affect all the people of the society, no matter where they are living, either in the west or in the east or north or south. So this is the main purpose of literature, and this is the distinguishing feature as well, which is very much different from history. There is one more point, students, as I told you, that history is biography. On the other hand, if we look at literature, that is the autobiography. Okay, my dear students, as I told you before, that history is the biography of any society, while literature is the autobiography of that society. How can you differentiate between biography and autobiography? My dear students, do you know the difference between biography and autobiography? Yes? Okay, no. So I'll tell you, don't worry. Basically, biography is a thing that is written by somebody else. For example, a biography of Shakespeare, definitely that is not written by Shakespeare himself, that would be written by somebody else. autobiography, that is written by the person himself, the writer himself. So that is the autobiography. So how will you relate the concept of history with literature, that one is the biography and the other one is the autobiography? Biography is history that is written by somebody else in order to give the chronological or the year by year description of any event of any society of any particular occasion. So that is history. When we say that is what is autobiography, that is written by the same person. So that is written by the society itself. That is why we call it literature. So literature is a clear depiction of the society itself. That is not something which is written by any other society. So a book of history can be written by any person who is not part of that society and is living in any other part there. But literature is a clear-cut depiction of the society itself. That is why it is known as the autobiography of the society. So again come to the point that history deals with the particular only, while poetry deals with the universal. So it is here we differentiate between literature and history as well. Literature is having the universal element, while history has the particular element only, that is about any particular event, any society, like the individuals of any particular society, that's all. But the poetry or the literature has a universal element that is accepted worldwide. So in order to make your literature perfect and well known everywhere, there must be an element of universality in your writing. We are again on the same point, that is relation of literature to life. Another view, that is of Dryden. He pointed out that imaginative literature gives us that is given by Dryden. He pointed out that imaginative literature gives us a just and lively image of human nature by representing its passions and humors. So this is just a lively image of the nature. This is known as imaginative literature, and that is based upon the passions and the humors of human nature as well. So that is his point of view. Dr. Johnson says, when we talk about literature and life, he says that poets, he says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He says that poet holds up a mirror to nature. Nothing can please many and please long, but just representation of general nature. So this literature is about general nature. That is why it is accepted by many people in the society, and it has a long-lasting effect as well, because of the, like, we can relate it to the previous concept that was given by another critic, that was by Aristotle. Like it needs to have, literature has to have, you know, the element of universality in it. So if something is not universal, so it cannot please too many people in the society, and it cannot please for a longer period of time. So this is very much necessary to make your literature universal. The kind of language which you use, the kind of expressions and your thinking, that must be universally accepted everywhere, no matters in which part of the world, and it has to deal with the moods of the people as well. In this way, people would read your writing for pleasure purposes, for information purposes as well, in order to know about the societies. So this is lively literature as well. The way to please the greatest number over the longest time period, which is the duty of imaginative literature. So this is the duty of the imaginative literature, to please too many people, plus to be there in any particular society for a longer period of time. So my dear students, these are the two purposes of the imaginative literature as well. That you have to, it should be accepted everywhere, and it should be accepted by many people, and however it should be there to please people for a longer period of time. So these are the two purposes of imaginative literature as well. The poet must know the manners and customs of men of all times and condition. So my dear students, you would be thinking that how this is possible to know about the manners and the custom of men of all times and conditions, because you cannot assume the future. What would happen after 100 years? What will happen the next day? We cannot think about it. That is why the poets or the writers, they have the imaginative power to impress people. They know, like in their imagination, they think about the customs, they think about the future generations, what would happen them, and in this way their literature, their writings would be universal everywhere, and they would be accepted even after centuries, because they follow this kind of pattern there. He should be able to penetrate to the common humanity underlying there. So that is about the common humanity. You do not talk about any particular kind of or class of society in the literature. It should attack, it should target the common humanity. In this way, everybody in the society, they would understand your literature in a quite good way. That is basically Johnson's view. Walter Pater's view about literature and life, that is, just as in proportion as the writer's aim, consciously or unconsciously, comes to be the transcribing, not of the word, not of the mere fact, but his sense of it. He becomes an artist. So again, we can see that the first point, that literature is fine arts. It's a part of fine arts. So the writer becomes an artist here. His work, fine arts and good art, in proportion to the truth of his presentment of this sense. So in order to be a good writer, there must be an element of universality, as we have discussed before, and then the transcription of reality. So this is not something else. This is the transcription. Whatever you see, whatever you feel while living in the society, you write down the things about that. So this is an imitation of reality. So if you imitate the things, if you have the sense to penetrate the things, so in this way the writer would become an artist and his work would become fine arts. Okay, so basically everything, whatever he is writing, that is based on truth. The literary artist does not give us the photographic imitation of reality, but a transcription of his vision of it. So my dear students, this is something which is very much interesting, that literature is not a photographic imitation of reality. This is a transcription of the vision. So what is transcription and what is photographic imitation? If you know the answer, then this is not at all confusing for you. If you don't know, then I would tell you about it. So photographic imitation, for example, when you take a photograph or image of something, so that is, you can edit it as well, that is still there. But when you talk about the transcription, for example, transcribe any interview, so you are not supposed to miss anything in that interview while transcribing the interview or transcribing any speech, so you are not supposed to do editing in this. So the literary artist does not give you the photographic imitation of reality, that is edited as well, and that is you take it through a proper camera. So this is something else. This is the transcription of the reality. He is not supposed to change anything from that reality. So this is a true imitation of reality, which is known as literature. It is from reality or life from which the artist starts, but he tries to reconstruct it when he would see it steadily and see it whole. So From the reality of the life, he has to take a start, and then he goes for the imagination. For example, if a writer or a poet starts with imagination, so that would be based on fantasy only. So he takes a start with the proper life, with the realities of life, that is, those are based on truth, and then he moves towards imagination in order to see a life which he wishes to see. So these things are very much important. So I would like to conclude relationship of life. That is a very good topic under literature, and you should understand what is the relationship of literature to life. All great pieces of literature are true to life. For example, if you look at the books of history, like all well-known writers, their books are still part of literature. Why? Because they are true to life. They depicted the reality and they represented the true life that is not twice removed from the truth, but basically that is based on truth, and those are not fake statements only. That is why the most preferable way of putting the things together, take a start from the real world, take a start from the concrete things from the world, and then go towards imagination. So this is the right way. Okay, so all the pieces, all the greatest pieces of literature, they are true to life. They are universally accepted. They are accepted everywhere in the whole world, might be. So they please too many people in the society. So what is this? Because of this fact that they are true to life. Poet writer concentrates on those characteristics and aspects of life which are permanent. So if a thing which is temporary or which is for a time being only, so poets and writers, they do not concentrate on those things. They only concentrate on the permanent things which do not change with the passage of time until any revolution came. So they do not talk about the temporary things only. They usually focus on the permanent things which would be there in any particular society with the passage of time, might be after centuries. So that is why their literature is accepted worldwide. He clutches at everything which promises some permanence among what is always fleeting. So again the same thing is there. The things which are changing with the passage of time, the writers and the poets, they usually do not focus on those things. In this way, their works would be remembered even after centuries. That is why he gives us a picture of reality which is more characteristics of life than anything which we discover by our own day-to-day life observation. So they give a very clear-cut picture of the society which is very different from our day-to-day life observation. So they are very keen observers as well, and they put those things in their writings which are of greater importance. Another point of discussion today, that is literature and society. Literature is intimately related to society because this is about life, this is about human beings, this is about culture, this is about writers' personality. So these things are part of society. So literature is intimately based on society. Viewed as a whole, a body of literature is part of the entire culture of the people. So basically, the main body of the literature that is about the entire culture of the people. So your culture is reflected through literature. If we talk about any particular civilization, so how can you see that civilization? Definitely that's not possible to go in that particular kind of country to check their civilization over there. That is saved in the books of history, that is there in the literature. So you can get to know about any particular kind of civilization through literature. The qualities of literature are dependent upon the people of that society. So whatever kind of people you have in society, literature would be based on the mentality, on the lifestyle of those people. So you cannot, again we are referring to the same concept of literature as biography. So it depends upon your people, your individual, what kind of people you have in the society, so that literature is about them. So it is dependent upon the people of any particular society. Its themes and problems emerge from group activities and group situations. So basically, whenever we talk about any particular kind of theme or problem that is in any kind of work, so that their focus is usually on the group activities and the group situations. They usually target a group of people. Its significance lies in the extent to which it expresses and enriches the totality of culture. It is an integral part of entire culture, tied by a tissue of connection with every other element in the culture. So this is an integral part of entire culture. So whatever kind of culture you have, how can you see the culture of any particular country? That would be saved in literature books, so you can see it, you can check it. So this is a true reflection of society, that is known as literature. Society influences literature in many ways, and the connection of literature with society are integral. So this is a connection between society and culture. So society that basically influences literature in too many ways. In fact, the range of social influences on literature is as broad as the entire range of operative social forces. The prevailing system of social organization, including the class structure, the economic system, the political organization, and the deeply rooted situations, the dominant ideas, the characteristic emotional tone, the sense of past, and the pattern of contemporary realities. So in these, through all these ways, through your economical, through your political, through your social system, your society influences the literature. So all the things would be obvious by reading any particular kind of literature, what kind of society that writer had even 2, 3, 5 centuries ago. So that is very much important. Society, it is usually assumed that society and culture, they have a very complex relationship. How? It seems very awkward, don't you think, students, that society and literature, they are part and parcel for each other. So why the relationship is very complex? So I'll clarify the concept for you people. It is very difficult to determine which element of society has exerted what influence on literature. So that is basically very much difficult to determine, that which element of the society has influenced the literature. So determining the influence, that is very much complex. We cannot therefore afford to isolate a single element in society, whether economic or ideological, and assign to it as a causal role in the final determination of literature. So again, your literature is dependent upon economical and ideological factors as well. The whole of the social process, including material, conceptual, emotional, and institutional elements, may be regarded as containing the potential influence determining the direction and character of literature of a period. In each period in the history of nation, a certain social situation is brought into the area of operative influence, which is different for any other social situation. So that is why their relationship is quite complex. Why? Because anything which is happening in a particular society, that might not be part of any other society. So when we take the universality element of literature here, so this is a very complex thing. So this is very much difficult for a writer to assume the things which are happening in other cultures as well. That is why society and culture, they have a very complex relationship. The writer of that period selects those elements of the social situation which have managed to produce an impact on him. So the writer of that very particular period, he combines or he selects only those elements of all those social situations which have managed to produce an impact on him. So here the idea of the writer's personality also would come. How? Because whatever he feels, whatever he experiences in the society, that would be his or her target. So that is very much important thing, and weaves them into a pattern which is compatible with his own standards of art and his views of human life. So here we are just delimiting literature to only one person, that is the writer or the creator of any particular literary work. Whatever he would experience, definitely that would be there in his work, in his poem, or for example in the novel, that would be there. That is why the relationship of society and literature, that is very much complex, and here you can say that there is an element of subjectivity as well, that literature is purely based on writer's own experience. A very fine example of the effects of social condition on the literature of the periods is provided by the literature of Shakespeare's time. The thing that strikes every reader today is the difference between the vivid Elizabethan drama, which is its better example, stands still as nobly as its first day, speaking directly to us. So Shakespearean tragedies, for example, they are still part of literature. Why? Because they are very much popular from the day first, and you can see that how Shakespeare captured the psyche of the different people who are living in different societies. So that is why his tragedies, his comedies, all the plays which are written by Shakespeare or the writers of his age, those are very much universal everywhere. The poetic literature of the narrative literature of the same time seems to us centuries older. So if we compare the poetic and the narrative literature of that time, so this seems to us quite older, because it live in the world of ideas that no longer has anything in common with our own. So there is no similarity of the ideas and the thoughts of that particular age with our thoughts and ideas today. So there is lack of similarity. That is why we think that literature is very old. On the other hand, Shakespearean tragedies, Shakespearean comedies, those are still very much popular. Why? Because they have the element of universality in it, and they have the same ideas and the same thoughts. Still we are following those ideas and those thoughts which were depicted by Shakespeare long ago. So that is why his literature is still very popular even after centuries. The main factor is that the determining sociological factors differ in two cases. Pure literature was dominating. So here another concept, that is the sociological factors. What kind of society you have or the writer has when he or she is writing something. So that is purely based upon the writer's perception of the reality and the way he or she puts the information in form of words in any particular kind of literary work. So that is very much important. That is why pure literature, because in pure literature our focus is not on the expression of the writer, basically that is on the information. So that is why of that time, the literature of that time was not okay. Now comes another point, that is the writer's personality. So how literature reflects one's personality. Every work of literature is intimately connected with the personality of the author who produces it. So that is basically the reflection of writer's personality. There is always a subjective element in any kind of writing. The writer is still there. There is always a man behind a book who is the producer of the book. Obviously this is something which is obvious, there is always a man behind the book, and the judging of the quality of literature becomes vital to us if we try to think to the author not as a mysterious disembodied force, but rather as a man who wrote to satisfy need and to resolve difficulties which are common to us. So here we are not supposed to take writer as a mysterious human being who is far away from the embodied experience which he is discussing. The writer is still there. There is subjectivity plus objectivity is also there. So we cannot ignore writer while reading any kind of literature. So that is very much important. Literature is a product of men and women who wrote it out of their lives. So literature is a true depiction of the experiences, of the ideas and of the thoughts of the writer. So in a nutshell, we can say that we cannot ignore writer's personality while reading any kind of literature. Expressing the view that every book is a reflection of the personality of the author, Matthew Arnold wrote, "What is really precious and inspiring in all that we got from literature except the sense of an immediate contact with genius itself? Objects could never be described except for the purpose of describing the feeling which they arouse in us, for language ought to represent at the same moment the thing and the author, the subject and the thought. Everything that we say ought to be dyed with us. The process is a long one, but it immortalizes us. For language is formed to convey not the object alone, but likewise the character, mood and intentions of the person who is representing them." So in this quotation, too many things are very much important. For example, the character, the mood and intentions of the person who is basically producing that writing. So that is very much important. So Matthew Arnold is also of the view that we cannot ignore the writer while reading any kind of thing, because that is a clear depiction of his character plus the mood and the intentions as well. So by keeping in view these things, the character of the writer, his moods and intentions, we should read any kind of thing. And on the other hand, we cannot ignore the society as well, and then the influence of society on writer's personality. What Matthew Arnold, Goethe and Peter have expressed may be called the personal or subjective view of literature, because they all are of the view that we cannot ignore the writer's personality. Maybe that is a subjective view of literature, which lays emphasis on the personal factor in all literature. But there are some critics who hold the opposite view, the impersonal or objective view about literature. Some of the critics, they say that literature has an objective element, so we cannot keep in view the writer's personality because it would make the writing very subjective. So there must be an element of objectivity in literature in order to make it universal. The personality of the author should have nothing to do with his writing. The author, who, like Shakespeare, expresses the personality of others in greater than the one, like Byron, who projects his own personality in his writing. So definitely they are of the view, the other critics, they are of the view that we have to put a writer on one side, and the writer, they also, all the writers, they also have to be objective in order to write any kind of thing, because that is not restricted to one individual only. So they just ignore the writer's personality when talking about literature. Flaubert, the greatest champion of this view, wrote in one of his letters that there are two kinds of poets. My dear students, according to Flaubert, there are two kinds of poets: the greatest, the rare ones, the true masters, sum up humanity. They are not preoccupied with themselves or their own passions. So they look at the people in their society. They are not self-centered people only. So that is why they are the greatest, and on the other hand, they are the rare ones as well. They put their personality, they put their self on one side, and then they become very objective when they write something. They put their own personality into the background in order to absorb themselves in the personalities of others, they produce the universal. In order to make their literature universal, they put their personality on one side and they look at the other realities of life as well. So according to Flaubert, there are very great people, and they are very rare ones as well, who put their personalities on one corner of the table, and they write about the objective things, objective realities of life. According to him, there are others who have only to create, and they achieve harmony, to weep, and they move us to think about themselves, and they are immortal. Possibly, if they were to do anything else, they might not go quite so far, but while they lack breadth, they have ardor and dash. In short, if they had been born with a different temperament, probably they would not have had genius at all. So he categorized poets into two different categories. One is those who keep in view their self while writing anything, and the other one is about the objectivity of the social realities of life. So Byron was of this family. According to Flaubert, Byron was of this family, Shakespeare of other. Who can tell me what Shakespeare loved, betrayed, or felt? So this is about Shakespeare used to put himself on one corner of the on the table. Fine. So in order to make his writings more objective and universal and to be accepted worldwide, so he used to put himself on one side of the room, you can say, and then he used to be more objective towards the thing. And Byron, his writings are usually based upon his life, so Flaubert, he puts both the poets, Byron and Shakespeare, into two different categories. My dear students, as you know that this is about history of English literature, so far I have given you the briefing on literature. What do we mean by literature? Literature in general. So my dear students, today we have discussed literature in general, types of literature, pure and applied literature, then literature communicates experience, then literature and society, literature and writer's personality, literature and society. So now you can see that how these things, they are interlinked with each other. So inshallah we'll move towards history of English literature in the next lecture. Hope you had enjoyed today's lecture, that is literature in general. So inshallah, see you tomorrow with a new topic. Thank you.